Mrs. Turner sat back in her seat, the ache of shame still heavy in her chest. Her fingers trembled as she closed her laptop after sending an apology email to the airline. CEO. The screen had glowed with her words. I judged a child unfairly. I owe him an apology. Now, with the email sent, she turned to look at Jamal. He sat quietly, eyes wide and thoughtful, as the plane cruised above the clouds. Maria had returned to her duties, leaving them a small bubble of calm. Gosh, Jamal's heart still fluttered from the morning's events. He stared out the window at a field of white clouds below, feeling the plane glide through the sky. His mind replayed the moments when security had boxed him in, when Mrs. Turner had judged him, and when Derek had stood up to speak for him. He felt a new sense of strength inside him. Mrs. Turner cleared her throat softly. Jamal turned and met her gaze, his brown eyes gentle but curious. She swallowed and said quietly, Jamal, would you mind talking with me for a few minutes? I'd like to explain myself and learn more about you. Jamal nodded. He unhooked his headphones and turned his body toward her. The plane's hum was steady and comforting. He saw Mrs. Turner's eyes fill with regret, but also with genuine interest. She began, I grew up in a small town where almost everyone looked like me. I never met someone like you until I went to college. She paused, choosing her words. Back then, I was afraid of anything different. I was taught to keep to my own kind. I never realized how wrong that was until today. Jamal listened, his small hands folded in his lap. He remembered his own mother's advice. People sometimes fear what they do not know. He leaned forward a little. I understand. He said softly. I used to be scared of big airplanes, but my mom told me to learn and be brave. Mrs. Turner smiled sadly. Your mom sounds very wise. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, as if it could shield her from her guilt. Never flown alone, and when I saw you, I let my fear speak for me. That was unfair. Jamal nodded. I wasn't trying to scare anyone. I'm here to visit my mom. She works in New York. She bought this ticket for me because I won a science award. Mrs. Turner's face lit up with real warmth now. Science award. That's wonderful. What did you win for? Jamal's eyes brightened as he described his project. A small solar-powered water purifier he built in his garage. Spoke in simple words, but with pride. He talked about how people in dry places needed clean water. He explained how he tested different materials to trap dirt and germs. As he talked, Mrs. Turner listened, leaning forward, genuinely interested. Derek, sitting just across the aisle, noticed their conversation. He rose and moved over to join them. His presence was calm and respectful. Mind if I sit in for a moment? He asked. Mrs. Turner and Jamal both shook their heads. Derek settled into the seat next to Mrs. Turner. I've worked with students like Jamal for years, he said. He has a real gift for science. Jamal blushed but smiled. Thank you, sir. Mrs. Turner looked between them. I want to help, she said. I see now that my fear hurt a good boy, and I want to do something right. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook and a pen. I'd like to support your science work. It's maybe a scholarship or a donation to your school's science program. Jamal's mouth formed a soft O. That would be amazing, he whispered. Our school needs new lab equipment. Derek nodded. I can help with that too. We can make a plan once we land. Mrs. Turner wrote down a few ideas in her notebook. She asked Jamal about his school, his favorite subjects, and his dream career. Jamal spoke about becoming an engineer and then working at NASA. He described the space missions he watched on TV and how he wanted to help astronauts stay healthy in space. As they talked, the unease from earlier melted away. Mrs. Turner's posture softened. She no longer looked tense. Jamal sat taller, his chest full of hope. Derek guided their words, making sure both felt heard. After a while, Mrs. Turner closed her notebook and said, I'm sorry again. I was selfish and scared. Showed me kindness when I was unkind. Thank you for forgiving me. Jamal smiled. It's okay, he said. Sometimes people make mistakes. What matters is we learn from them. The three of them shared Quiet moment of understanding. The seatbelt signs were off, and passengers stood and stretched, but none of them moved. They were still wrapped in the trust they had built. Mrs. Turner stood and pulled her smartphone from her pocket. She tapped a few keys and said, "I want to share this story with permission. Maybe it can help others think twice before they judge." She turned to Jamal. "Do I have your permission to post a short message about what happened and how brave you were?"
Ow.
Jamal nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. Mrs. Turner posted a brief message on her verified social media account today. "I judged a young boy wrongly. His name is Jamal. He's brave and kind. He taught me a lesson in courage and forgiveness. Let's remember to judge by character, not color." She added a smiling emoji and hit post. Within minutes, likes and supportive comments began to appear. Derek smiled at her. "Well said," he said. Jamal peeked at her screen. He saw friendly comments. "So proud of you, Jamal. Thank you for sharing this story." His chest warmed with the kindness of strangers. Mrs. Turner turned the phone off and tucked it away. "That felt good," she admitted. "Did it? Want to keep doing good?" Jamal nodded. "Me too," he said. "I want to help people who don't have clean water. I want to show everyone what I can do." Derek patted Jamal's shoulder. "You will. I will help you." The flight attendants began their meal service, and Maria approached with a warm smile. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked Jamal. He shook his head. "No, thank you." Then he looked at Mrs. Turner. "Do you want some juice?" Offered. Mrs. Turner blinked in surprise. "I would love some juice, thank you." Jamal rang the call button, and Maria brought 2 cups of orange juice. They clinked their glasses together gently. "2 new friendships," said Jamal. "2 learning from mistakes," added Mrs. Turner. "And 2 bright futures," said Derek. They drank, and the plane soared higher above the earth. Outside the window, the horizon glowed with late afternoon sun. Inside, a bond had formed between a boy, a woman who changed her heart, and a man who believed in them both. As the flight continued, they talked about their plans. Mrs. Turner would meet Jamal's school principal in a video call that night to arrange funding. Derek would introduce Jamal to his network of engineers. Jamal would write a report on his water purifier, ready to improve it even more. They agreed to stay in touch. Hours passed quickly. The sky darkened as the sun set, and the cabin lights dimmed for a short rest. Jamal leaned his head back, closing his eyes, feeling safe and proud. Mrs. Turner closed her eyes too, thinking of the change she had begun. Derek leaned back, content. In that gentle glow, 3 lives had changed. A moment of fear had turned into a lifetime of support. And high above the clouds, they all knew this journey was just the beginning of something far greater. The plane's engines rumbled louder as it taxied toward the runway. Jamal sat by the window, his eyes fixed on the clouds beyond the glass. His small body still trembled from the encounter with airport security, but he held himself steady. Remembered what Maria had said. "You handled that really well." He let that thought warm his chest. Across the aisle, Mrs. Turner sat stiffly in her seat, her head bowed. She stared at the armrest, her face pale. The guilt weighed on her heavily. She had watched the officers leave and then watched Jamal drink. His juice, she had seen the calm strength in his eyes. Now she felt ashamed of herself. Suddenly, a tall man stood up in the center of the aisle. He wore a dark suit, and his silver hair shone under the cabin lights. A hush fell over first class. Passengers looked at him, curious. Even Mrs. Turner lifted her head and stared. The man spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I'd like to say a few words." He smiled warmly. "My name is Derek Whitmore. I'm a tech entrepreneur and I work with young people who dream of changing the world." His voice was calm but firm. He pointed gently at Jamal. "This is Jamal Harris." People leaned forward, surprised. Mrs. Turner looked between Derek and Jamal, confusion and guilt battling in her eyes. Jamal sat up straighter, his heart pounding. He recognized Derek from news interviews. Derek had helped students win science fairs, given scholarships, and talked about treating everyone with respect. Derek continued a few minutes ago. Security was called on Jamal. He was simply sitting in his seat, waiting for takeoff. He had done nothing wrong. Out! But someone's fear made them judge him. He looked directly at Mrs. Turner, who winced but did not look away. Fear can be powerful, but it can also blind us to the truth. His voice softened. Jamal, would you stand up for us, please? Jamal's eyes widened, then gently stood for a moment, then gently stood. He straightened his hoodie and let go of the armrests. All eyes were on him now. Some looked sympathetic, some curious, and some still unsure. Jamal felt the weight of their gazes, but he drew in a deep breath and held his head high. Derek smiled. Proudly, Jamal is traveling alone to visit his mother in New York City. He earned this first-class ticket by winning a national science competition. He is smart, brave, and polite. He paused, letting the words sink in. Jamal's cheeks warmed as he looked around. He saw nods and soft smiles from the other passengers. Then Derek addressed Mrs. Turner. We all make mistakes. But what matters is how we respond. Would you please tell us what happened, ma'am? Mrs. Turner's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Finally she spoke, her voice shaking. I saw Jamal, a young black boy, sitting in first class. I got scared. I thought someone might be in danger. Didn't mean to hurt him. I panicked. The cabin was silent. Even the flight attendants paused from their work to listen. Maria stood at the front with a gentle, understanding look on her face. The other attendant had stopped adjusting the air vents. All eyes were on Mrs. Turner. Derek nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty. Jamal, would you like to say something? He stepped back, giving Jamal space. Jamal glanced at Mrs. Turner. He saw her tears and the regret in her eyes. He remembered how his mother taught him about kindness and forgiveness. All she had said, holding on to anger only hurts you more. He took a steady breath and spoke softly but clearly. I forgive you, he said, looking directly at Mrs. Turner. His voice was calm, but his courage shone in his eyes. I know you're sorry. I know you didn't really know me. I hope next time you can think before you judge. A gentle wind seemed to blow through the cabin. Mrs. Turner's shoulders shook as she began to sob quietly. She covered her face with her hands and tears fell onto her lap. Some passengers shifted in their seats, uncomfortable at first, but then, one by one, they began to applaud. It started softly to claps, then 4. And it grew until the whole first-class cabin joined in. Jamal managed a small, shy smile. Maria offered him a fresh bottle of water. He took it and nodded his thanks. Even Mrs. Turner clasped her hands. Joining the applause through her tears, Derek returned to his seat and turned to Jamal. That was very brave of you, he said warmly. You showed everyone here what true strength looks like. He offered Jamal a firm handshake. Jamal shook it, his grip surprisingly strong for his size. Derek placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder in a friendly gesture. If you ever need a mentor or some advice, I'd be happy to help. Jamal's eyes lit up. Thank you, sir. Mrs. Turner wiped her eyes with a silk handkerchief and leaned forward. Jamal, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do to make this right? Her voice wavered. Jamal thought for a moment. He remembered his mother's words about turning pain into purpose. You could help other children, he said finally. Donate to science programs in schools that don't have the money for them. Help kids like me get chances. Mrs. Turner nodded, understanding at last. I will, she promised. I will make a donation today. Maria brought over the donation form that flu jets often carried for charities. Mrs. Turner filled it. Out, her hands still trembling but determined. She handed it back to Maria, who smiled and said, Thank you, ma'am. You just made a difference. The plane's engines roared more loudly as they prepared for takeoff. Derek looked at Jamal and said, Whenever you feel afraid, remember this moment. You belong here just as much as anyone else. Jamal closed his eyes briefly and then opened them, meeting Derek's gaze. I will, he replied, as the plane sped down the runway, lifting gracefully into the sky. A sense of calm filled the cabin. Jamal pressed his forehead against the cool window, watching the ground fall away. He felt hope and pride bubbling inside him. Mrs. Turner sat back, tears still on her cheeks, but a soft smile on her lips. She watched Jamal, seeing him now not as a stranger, but as a young man with promise and dignity. The other passengers turned to their own lives, some read their books. Some closed their eyes to rest, but the air in first class felt different now. It felt lighter, filled with understanding and the promise of change. Jamal thought of his mother waiting for him in New York, of the science fair trophy he carried in his backpack, and of the new friend he had made today. He felt a warm glow of confidence. He knew that this flight would not define him, but the way he rose above it would, and high above the clouds. As the sun painted the sky in golden hues, Jamal smiled softly, ready for whatever came next. The cabin was still filled only with the soft hum of the engines and the low murmur of passengers adjusting their seats. Jamal sat near the window, his small hands folded neatly on his lap. He stared straight ahead, though his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. The security officers had left, but their presence still lingered, like an unwelcome shadow creeping across the first-class cabin. Maria, the flight attendant, offered him a gentle smile and placed a small cup of apple juice on the little table. Beside him, here she whispered, "Take your time." Jamal nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. He reached for the juice as if it were a lifeline. The cold glass touched his fingers, and he took a careful sip. The sweetness soothed him a little, but he still felt shaken. The other passengers in first class glanced at him now and then. Some looked sympathetic, some curious, and a few, like Mrs. Turner, watched with hard eyes. It felt as though everyone in the cabin held a silent opinion about him, and most of those opinions were unfair. Jamal closed his eyes for a moment, recalling his mother's words, "Be polite, be calm, and never let anyone make you feel small." He took another drink and sat up straighter. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Mrs. Turner leaned forward, adjusting her silk scarf. Her palms were sweaty on her designer purse. She stared at Jamal, guilt flickering in her eyes. Then she looked away quickly, pretending to read the in-flight magazine. She could feel every pair of eyes in the cabin on her now, judging her as she had judged the boy. A hot blush rose in her cheeks. Her breath came fast and shallow. 5 minutes before takeoff stretched like an hour. The plane's engines rumbled louder, and Maria returned to her station at the front. She gave both Jamal and Mrs. Turner a final check. Maria's face was calm, but her eyes held a spark of disapproval for Mrs. Turner's earlier actions. "Notice this." He felt a small measure of pride knowing someone had his back. Just then, as the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, something unexpected happened. A man from across the aisle stood up, who was tall and well-dressed, with salt and pepper hair and calm brown eyes that seemed kind but strong. He wore a crisp suit and a softly shining watch. Jamal recognized him immediately from the news. Derek Whitmore, successful tech entrepreneur who often spoke about diversity and inclusion. Jamal had watched videos of him giving speeches, and he knew. Derek had a reputation for helping young people of color chase their dreams. Derek cleared his throat gently. All eyes turned toward him. Mrs. Turner's head snapped around, surprise mixed with anger. The other passengers watched silently, waiting for what was about to happen. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Derek," began, his voice steady and clear. "I want to introduce myself and this young man here." He pointed to Jamal. "I'm Derek Whitmore, and this is Jamal Harris." The cabin grew very quiet. Even the flight attendants paused, sensing something important was unfolding. Mrs. Turner's mouth opened, but no words came out. Derek continued, "I saw what happened just a few minutes ago. I saw how security was called on Jamal, who was simply minding his own business. I understand fear can cause us to judge too quickly, but in this case, that judgment was wrong." A ripple of agreement went through the cabin. Some passengers nodded, others murmured, "That's right." Mrs. Turner looked down at her hands, twisting the strap of her purse until her knuckles turned white. Derek took a step closer to Jamal and held out his hand. "Jamal, may I shake your hand?" Jamal hesitated for just a moment, then shook Derek's hand. It felt solid and warm, like an anchor in the storm of his emotions. "That was very brave of you," Derek said softly. "You stayed calm and polite, even when people treated you unfairly. It shows true strength." "Thank you, sir," he whispered. Derek turned to Mrs. Turner. Her eyes were filled with tears now, and she struggled to speak. Finally, she managed, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just got scared." Derek nodded, then asked, "Can you tell us why you were so scared?" Mrs. Turner looked at Jamal's calm face. She swallowed again and said, "I guess I've always been afraid of crime. Seen people on the news, heard stories. I thought you might be dangerous." There was a hush in the cabin. Derek laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I understand fear," he said. "But when fear turns into judgment without reason, it hurts people who have done nothing wrong." Mrs. Turner's lips trembled. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she dabbed them with a silk handkerchief. "I've never felt so ashamed in my life," she admitted. "I judged a child for no reason." Jamal's heart fluttered. He looked at Mrs. Turner and saw real regret in her eyes. He remembered the advice his mother always gave him. Some people will judge you before they know you, but you can decide how you respond. He took a deep breath. "I accept your apology," he said quietly. "But please remember, children like me work hard for what we have." Mrs. Turner nodded, her face crumpled. "You're right." She met his gaze and gave a small, shaky smile. "I'm truly sorry." A few passengers applauded softly. Maria stepped forward and offered both of them water, as if bridging the gap between fear and understanding. The plane began its slow taxi to the runway. Engines roared more loudly, and the first signs of movement rippled through the cabin. But in first class, something had shifted. The tension that weighed in the air had lifted a little, replaced by a quiet sense of connection. Derek sat down in his seat across the aisle from Jamal. He leaned forward and said, "You know, I remember being your age. People looked at me and made assumptions. But what got me through was knowing I belonged, and having someone believe in me." Jamal swallowed and nodded. "My mom believes in me," he said. "She said I could do anything if I work hard." Derek smiled. "Your mom is right, and I want you to know I believe in you too. If you ever need advice or help with science projects, you can reach out to me." Jamal's eyes lit up. Really, Derek said, and he slid a small card across the aisle. It had his email and phone number. "Keep it." Jamal picked it up carefully and tucked it into his pocket. He felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling of hope stronger than any fear. Mrs. Turner watched this exchange, tears continuing to fall. She pulled out her laptop and began typing an apology email to the airline CEO, explaining what happened and recommending better sensitivity training for staff. She wanted to make something good come from her mistake. As the plane roared down the runway and lifted into the sky, Jamal pressed his forehead against the window, watching the ground fall away. He felt the gentle weight of Derek's friendship, and even Mrs. Turner's regretful kindness. For the first time that day, he felt like his skin color was not a weakness, but simply a part of who he was, a part of a story that could inspire others. Above the clouds, the sun shone bright. Jamal closed his eyes and thought of the science fair trophy waiting for him in New York, of his mother's proud smile, and now of the new chance to show the world what he could do. And somewhere behind him, Mrs. Turner silently said a prayer of thanks that she had learned an unexpected lesson mid-flight, one she would carry with her forever. The airport was buzzing with people that morning. Suitcases rolled across shiny floors, announcements echoed from the speakers, and travelers rushed to their gates. Among the crowd, a 13-year-old boy named Jamal stood with a boarding pass in his hand and a nervous smile on his face. He was flying alone for the very first time. And not just anywhere he was flying, first class. His mom had surprised him with this ticket as a gift after he won a national science competition. She told him, "You earned it, baby. Walk proud and enjoy every second." Jamal wore his best clothes for the trip, a clean hoodie, dark jeans, and his favorite sneakers. His hair was neatly brushed, and a small backpack was strapped over his shoulder. As he walked confidently to the first-class boarding lane, he remembered his mom's voice in his head. "Be polite, be calm, and never let anyone make you feel small." Meanwhile, in the same boarding line, a white woman in her 50s, named Mrs. Turner, was standing with her designer handbag. She looked around at the passengers, adjusting her scarf and checking her gold watch. She was the kind of woman who expected everything to be in order. She had traveled first class all her life and believed it was a place for successful high-class people like her. As Jamal walked past her to reach his seat 2A in first class, she noticed him. She frowned slightly, her eyes narrowing. A young black kid in first class? Traveling alone? Something didn't sit right with her. She assumed he had taken the wrong seat or was in the wrong section. She tapped the flight attendant and whispered, "Excuse me, but I think there's a mistake. That boy shouldn't be up here, right?" The flight attendant, Maria, glanced at Jamal. "That's his seat, ma'am," she said kindly. He checked in with the correct ticket. But Mrs. Turner wasn't convinced. "Are you sure he's alone and, well, he just doesn't look like someone who flies first class?" Maria's smile faded just slightly. She had heard things like this before. "Yes, ma'am. His ID and ticket were verified. He's fine." Jamal had heard her, tried not to show it, but the sting of her words hit deep. Still, he kept his head up and took his seat by the window. He pulled out his headphones and tablet, trying to distract himself. But his hands shook a little. Mrs. Turner sat just 2 rows behind him, still uneasy. She stared at Jamal now and then, as if waiting for him to do something wrong. Her thought raced. What if he snuck in? What if he's dangerous? What if no one is saying anything because they're afraid? Without telling anyone, she quietly took out her phone and called the airport's security line. "Hi," she whispered. "I'm on flight 728 to New York, seated in first class. There's a young boy up here alone. I don't feel safe. Can someone check this?" The person on the other end assured her someone would be sent immediately. Mrs. Turner hung up, feeling satisfied. She had done her part. 5 minutes later, just as the cabin crew were preparing for takeoff, the plane door opened again. 2 uniformed airport security officers stepped into the plane. Passengers turned in confusion, wondering what was going on. They walked down the first-class aisle and stopped at Jamal's seat. "Excuse me, young man," one of them said gently. "Can we see your boarding pass, please?" Jamal blinked in surprise. "Sure," he said, reaching into his pocket. His voice was calm, but his chest tightened. The other officer noticed his nervousness and softened his tone. "It's okay, we just need to check something real quick." Maria, the flight attendant, rushed over. "What's going on here?" "Someone made a report," the officer replied. "We just need to verify." Maria frowned. "I already checked his documents. He's exactly where he should be." Still, they examined his ticket and ID, then checked the passenger list. Everything matched perfectly. Mrs. Turner leaned forward in her seat. "I just wanted to make sure everything was in order," she said loudly. "He didn't look right." The officer turned to her and replied, "Ma'am, there's no issue. Everything is completely in order." Passengers nearby started to whisper. Some shook their heads, clearly understanding what had just happened. The officers gave Jamal a small nod. "Sorry for the trouble, young man. You're good to go." Jamal nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Okay, thank you." They left the plane, and the door shut again. Maria gave Jamal a glass of juice and leaned down to whisper, "You handled that really well." He gave a small smile, but inside he was hurt, confused, and embarrassed. He had done nothing wrong. He had earned his seat. But still, someone had seen his skin color and assumed the worst. He put his headphones back on and looked out the window. The clouds hadn't even started moving yet, but already this flight felt heavy. Behind him, Mrs. Turner sat silently. The security had found nothing. Jamal had been polite, calm, and prepared. But something didn't feel right anymore, not about Jamal, but about herself. A quiet sense of doubt crept into her chest, and just 5 minutes later, something would happen that would shake her even more, something that would make her see Jamal and herself in a whole new light. The plane wheels touched the runway in New York, and a light cheer rose from the passengers. Jamal fastened his seatbelt for the landing, his heart fluttering with excitement. He had just shared so much with Mrs. Turner and Derek, and now he would step into a new city and a new chapter of his life. The cabin lights brightened, and Maria came by to wish him well. She smiled warmly and said, "You were incredible today, Jamal. Remember that?" He nodded and whispered, "Thank you." feeling a gentle pride in his chest. Once the seatbelt sign turned off, Jamal stood and gathered his backpack. Mrs. Turner was already up. Clutching her handbag, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness, Derek rose too, smoothing his suit jacket. They walked off the plane together, leaving the first-class cabin filled with soft chatter about what had happened. As they passed through the jet bridge, crew members gave Jamal thumbs up, and a few fellow passengers offered him congratulatory smiles. He felt as if the whole flight had become a family. In the bright terminal, Jamal looked for a sign that said baggage claim, spotted his suitcase moving on a conveyor belt, and stepped forward to retrieve it. Mrs. Turner and Derek waited, patiently. Then, just as Jamal held his bag, a young woman approached them. She introduced herself as a reporter from the local TV station. She had watched Mrs. Turner's social media post and wanted to hear the story in person. Mrs. Turner took a steady breath and, with Jamal's permission, agreed to an on-the-spot interview. A cameraman set up his equipment. Mrs. Turner looked nervous, but Derek gave her a comforting nod. The reporter asked Jamal to describe what happened on the plane. His voice was calm as he told the story. How he earned the ticket, how fear had led to an unfair call to security, and how kindness and courage had healed the moment. The reporter then turned to Mrs. Turner, who spoke honestly about her regret, her apology, and her new desire to help young people. Derek added a few words about how quick judgments can hurt, and how one person's courage can change many minds. Within hours, the TV segment aired on local news. Viewers saw clips of Jamal speaking, Mrs. Turner apologizing, and Derek praising Jamal's strength. On social media, #LetJamalFly began to trend not just locally but nationwide. Thousands of people shared the video, adding messages of support. So proud of Jamal. Thank you for changing your mind, Mrs. Turner. May we all be so brave. Jamal's mother, waiting in New York, saw the story unfold on her phone. Her eyes filled with tears as she watched her son speak with poise and grace. Soon after, messages started pouring in. A teacher from a school in California invited Jamal to be a guest speaker via video call for their science class. A small foundation dedicated to youth science programs offered him a scholarship. Even a space camp in Florida sent him an invitation to attend a week-long workshop on astronomy. Derek forwarded each message to Jamal's email and said, "Pick the ones you want. You deserve every opportunity." Meanwhile, Mrs. Turner sat in a quiet corner of the terminal, drafting an op-ed for a major newspaper. She wrote about the day she jumped to conclusions, how Jamal's calm courage humbled her, and how she wanted to use her resources to support children in science and education. She wrote in simple, honest language, hoping her words would reach people who needed to learn the same lesson she did. She titled it, "The Day I Learned to See Beyond Fear." By evening, the paper confirmed they would print it the next morning. Jamal found a quiet bench near the baggage area and sat down too. Check his email. New messages arrived every few minutes. He saw notes from students saying they were inspired by his story. He saw an invitation to speak at a national youth conference in Washington, D.C. He even saw a message from a NASA researcher offering to show him around their lab someday. Each message made his chest tighten with gratitude and excitement. Derek came to sit beside him. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. Jamal smiled, his eyes bright. "I feel ready to work hard and help others. I never imagined all this would happen from one flight." Derek nodded. "That's the power of one moment. You were brave, and people noticed. Now, you have a platform to do even more good." At that moment, Mrs. Turner joined them, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa she had purchased from a nearby cafe. She handed one to Jamal and one to Derek. "Here," she said. "You both deserve a warm drink." Jamal accepted the cup, feeling its warmth spread through his fingers. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Mrs. Turner blinked away. "Tears, no," she said, her voice soft. "Thank you for forgiving me and showing me kindness." They laughed gently, and for a moment the 3 of them sat together, warm in the bustling airport. Above them, a flight board showed departures and arrivals. But they were focused on the journey ahead, one filled with science fairs, scholarships, mentoring, and helping others. That night, when Jamal finally stepped out into the cool New York air, his mother ran to him and hugged him tightly. She had watched his interview on TV and read the news stories. She whispered in his ear, "I'm so proud of you." Jamal smiled and said, "I had help." He introduced her to Derek and Mrs. Turner. She thanked them both with tears in her eyes. In the days that followed, Jamal spoke at a youth conference, telling other children about how courage and kindness can overcome fear. He accepted the scholarship and used it to buy new lab equipment for his school. Mrs. Turner visited several schools, talking about her mistake and how people can change for the better. Derek connected Jamal with engineers who helped him improve his solar purifier design. The op-ed ran in the newspaper, reaching thousands of readers. Letters poured into Mrs. Turner's inbox from people who had been moved by her words. She organized a small fund to support science education in underprivileged schools. She asked Jamal to be the face of the project. He agreed, proud to help. Other kids like him. Months later, when Jamal's solar purifier prototype won another award, he stood on a stage set up in a school auditorium. The audience was packed with students, teachers, parents, and even a few airline crew members from that very flight. Mrs. Turner and Derek sat in the front row, beaming. Jamal spoke about his project, his dreams, and the lesson he had learned about courage, kindness, and forgiveness. At the end of his speech, he looked out at the crowd and said, "One moment can change your life. It can start with fear, but it can end with hope. Be brave and be kind." The applause was thunderous. Mrs. Turner wiped away tears and stood to clap, her heart full. Jamal's journey had begun with a ticket and a chance. It had taken him through fear, judgment, apology, and finally to new opportunities. He had gained mentors, friends, and a purpose beyond his wildest dreams. And he knew that, as long as he kept walking tall, just like his mother told him, he could help change the world one flight, one project, and one heart at a time.